I'm Dane Rose. If we set out on the ultimate quest, life, the universe, and everything, we find that the human journey is stretched across an infinite continuum. And in the simplest terms, our journey is going from the hell of chronic, multidimensional, intense, meaningless suffering to the heaven of sustainable, multidimensional, high levels of well-being for everyone. That's the human journey. And the continuum upon that journey is correlated with competence. We all want to feel good. We don't want to feel bad. We all have the same amount of time. Certainly in a day, 24 hours, we have the same amount of time. We're in relatively similar environments ecologically. Money varies dramatically person to person, different culture to culture. So that's a wild card. But we all have a certain amount of time, money, and natural resources. And if we're really, really smart, we can create a lot of sustainable well-being for ourselves and other people. And if we're really, really stupid, we can have all the money in the world, all the time in the world. We can have our minions strip an entire ecology of its natural resources and discover that we are miserable, that the people around us are miserable, and that our children will not have the opportunity to be miserable because we've consumed so much resources. So the continuum of sustainable well-being and the continuum of competence, the continuum of intelligence, are corollary. They go hand in hand. Now, the ultimate quest is, for the answer of life, the universe, and everything, is what is the recipe? What is the recipe? What's the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that will create heaven here on earth, that will create the most amount of sustainable well-being for ourselves and our community? That's the journey. That's the quest to find that recipe. Now, on a very micro level, you might take this down to a little experiment. For 30 minutes a day, with no more than $30 a day, for 30 days, try and create the most amount of sustainable human well-being for yourself and other people. The most that you can possibly figure out. And every day, do it. Meaning every day, sit down and maybe spend 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes figuring out, or maybe spend the first 30 minutes of the first day figuring out what you'll do on subsequent days. But your job is to figure out how to create the most happiness with 30 minutes and no more than $30. See what you come and measure the results. Try and look at how happy you are at the end of 30 minutes, and to the best of your ability in a culture that is committed to ignorance around understanding how different protocols lead to happiness, how much happier other people are. So there's your task. Now, in my own limited exploration of this terrain, I've identified 5 directions, 5 exciting areas to create massive amounts of sustainable well-being for the least amount of time, money, and natural resources. Number 1, have one less child. In the West, a child will consume $400,000, produce 100 tons of energy in the form of stuff called garbage, stuff we don't know what to do with, consume 90,000 gallons of gasoline directly and indirectly in the course of living, producing 1,000 metric tons of CO2 in the atmosphere, and taking thousands upon thousands of hours of parental attention. So you can see that as a budget, $400,000, 18 years, thousands of hours of your time. And of course, the moment you decide to have one less child, 1,500 tons of CO2 just deleted out of the atmosphere, 100 tons deleted out of a landfill. And why don't you take half of that budget, $200,000, to create a nonprofit? You can do it with LegalZoom in a couple of hours and a few $100s. You can now put that $200,000 tax-free into a nonprofit and figure out how to create the most amount of happiness for yourself and other people with that mandate, right? So that's kind of direction number one less child. And in doing so, slowing down the population until we make the protocol sustainable. Because in every relationship, in this case, our species' relationship with our host body, it is sustainable or it is cancerous. Meaning a cancer consumes more of its host every day than the host can generate and replenish. And right now, human beings are consuming more oil per day than the earth can regenerate, or that humans can regenerate. They are consuming more fish every day than the oceans can regenerate. They're generating at 200 tons or 100 tons per person over the course of a lifetime, more garbage. That if we keep continuing in this direction, there won't be enough holes in the ground to put all the tons of garbage in. So there are certainly some areas where we're consuming faster than we're generating. We're cutting down trees faster than they have time to grow. And that's our oxygen supply. See, and the trouble with a cancerous relationship with a host body, be it a good friend, be it a government, when the citizens ask their governments to give more than they give to their government, the government can print money until the country goes bankrupt, right? The problem with taking more than you give in value in a relationship is you kill off your partner. If you have a cancerous relationship with your spouse and every day you make them feel worse, you spend more of their money, and you tire them out, well, eventually you have a broke, decrepit, dead spouse, which isn't much of a relationship partner. Whereas if every day you invest in your spouse's skills, their intelligence, you build them up, you make them feel great, you have an incredibly rich, fun partner to be with. And so that's kind of the continuum of intelligence. So one less child, freeing up thousands of hours, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do something useful with. So you're ahead at the moment you make that decision. So that's one direction. Now, another direction is a community of like-minded people with tiny homes to basically pool what we're looking for on the intelligence continuum, by the way, Intelligence is measured by the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into sustainable well-being. So the first thing to look at is waste. And when I look at my house in California, I have $5,000 worth of tools sitting in the garage, some of which I have never used, some of which I use 10 minutes a year. 99% waste, right? I look at my kitchen, right? Some days we eat out. Some days and months I'm on vacation. And then I use it a few minutes a day. 90% inefficient. I look at my film studio here that I use on average an hour a day. So 90% inefficient. My laundry machine, 90% inefficient. My car, 90% inefficient. My garden, available for all kinds of things, but 90% of the time, 95% of the time, nobody's in it, right? Object after object, tool after tool, space after space with 90% waste. It's not sustainable. It's not intelligent. How do we take all of that waste and reduce, let's say, 70% of that 90% waste so that there's only 20% waste? How do we do that and save an enormous amount of money and at the same time increase sustainable well-being? Well, now we're into community space. Because at the same time, there's all this unutilized resource. There are spikes in loneliness, spikes in meaninglessness, spikes in addiction, dissociation, right? So how do we solve all of these problems? And one way to do so is to create a community of between 75 and 100 people with one tool shop and a grand and glorious kitchen and dining room space where everyone's private space is a very simple, very beautiful dome in nature. It's one of the most elegant shapes. Reminds us of the womb. It makes us feel very at home. It doesn't distract from nature. Where people walk from between the community spaces without any cars, which makes it completely safe and reduces 90% of the cars needed. Where people do remote work and community work. That is, conserving 90% of the typical electricity and heating, etc., used otherwise. So how do you take the financial cost down by hundreds, by hundreds of percent? So if you, like this house here, $800,000 in California, how do you take that down to less than $100,000, an eightfold decrease in the cost, while simultaneously reducing the utility costs and increasing personal well-being? Well, there you have a 10x living community. So this is another kind of path to explore. Now, the third arena to explore is culture. Now, another way of saying that is identity. An identity is simply a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that I identify with. That's me. If I say it's me, it's my identity. If I say that's just a pattern, it's just a pattern. The ego identifies with a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. that produces most of the well-being or suffering, most of the life around us. So if we can change the identity, the pattern that the eye identifies with, we dramatically improve well-being. So identity design, which on a larger scale is cultural design. Cultural design is the single most potent technology that we are neglecting on the planet today. Because the identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that we as an individual, group, family, and culture reproduce on a regular basis determines 90% of the suffering or happiness we each personally and or collectively experience. So identity design is another such arena. And if we look at the most important technology on the planet today, it is a technology of deciding things. And in order to make better decisions, we need to have better data. Now, there's a tremendous amount of information that nobody has. You don't know on a 1 to 10 scale how depressed I am today, yesterday, or tomorrow. But here's the joke. Nobody does. Nobody's sending me a questionnaire. There are more than 100 critical things for understanding the trajectory of your future that absolutely no one knows, sometimes even you, 90% of the time. Meaning we are flying blind as a cult 90% of the time or more about the most important variables that are predictive of whether you and I will be in misery or bliss tomorrow. And there's just no reason in the information age not to know these things. So we've already got billions of infrastructure in more than 1 billion cell phones on the planet today, smartphones. We've got billions of dollars in infrastructure in the internet. We've all learned to speak a language and to type. We're just not using our smartphones very smartly. Meaning, if you look at the statistics of what people use their phones on, a lot of it is social media. And then you look at the happiness graph for how happy people become when they get more active on Facebook and Instagram, etc. And you see there's an inverse correlation. People are more unhappy if they spent 3 hours on Facebook today than if they didn't. So people aren't intelligently allocating their screen time. So if you could take that abuse of screen time and refocus it in an app that would reveal the data necessary to make better decisions, not the data necessary to buy more products we don't need based on false information, but the data necessary to make better decisions. If we could allocate more time in that direction and then make better decisions, that becomes the most potent resource in our day, the most highly leveraged thing, the consumption of accurate, useful data that leads us to improve our identity, our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, to a more intelligent pattern that generates more sustainable well-being per unit of energy consumed. That is the holy grail of leverage. Cultural design brought into the most prominent technology of our age to disseminate free information that leads to sustainable well-being, that cannot be bought by advertisers, that is generated as metadata to transcend the cultural and political pressures of a given body of people. Because in shame-based cultures, in shame-based populations, the truth will get you punished. But if you can generate metadata in exchange for accessing metadata, then the truth has no fear. And the truth is the most powerful technology that there is. Now, the fifth area is a little bit of a blind spot, because when you're traumatically illiterate, you don't know that you don't know something. And when you don't know that you don't know something, and you don't know something, you don't know how important that is. You've got a blind spot. The worst blind spots are the blind spots you don't think matter that do matter, that you don't know about, but that make a tremendous amount of difference. And trauma is one of those areas. The book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, among others on PTSD and complex PTSD, helps to blow a hole in that opacity and that blind spot that we as a culture and we as families and we as individuals have been painting over for hundreds upon hundreds of years. And it is one of the most important holes in relationship to identity. Because why is it exactly that we persist in thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being the very things that destroy our host body, that damage the people we love the most, including ourselves, and that guarantee to perpetuate the misery that we are in, when there are so many other ways of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that statistically promise far higher yields of happiness? Why is it that a miserable person would rather commit suicide than change their identity, their pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being? Why? And although I don't expect 95% of our population to see it now behind the opaque barrier of traumatic illiteracy, as soon as the biology of trauma and the degree of PTSD is illuminated by such books as The Body Keeps the Score, it becomes perfectly understandable why terrified and traumatized people are committed at the deepest biological level not to be out of control, to avoiding the unknown, to staying in self-referential loops that they can control. You see, in cultural design, the most powerful technology that the race, that the species can possess, takes us into the exact opposite territory. It takes us into the unknown. It takes us into uncertainty. It takes us towards chaos and the law of unintended consequences. And it requires us to let go of control and to change. The very thing that a traumatized person who has not recovered from the terror of traumatic abuse, layer after layer after layer, the very thing that the traumatized person fears the most, letting go, facing the unknown, change, is exactly what is necessary in order to critically examine an individual, a family, or a cult identity and edit it in a way that can increase sustainable well-being by 1,000% while reducing the consumption of natural resources and money. In other words, a traumatically illiterate person cannot overcome the instinctive clinging to the known and to the past that is necessary to embrace intelligence, evolution, happiness, sustainability through cultural design. These paths, becoming traumatically literate, becoming part of a tiny house micro-community that shares your values, investing in apps that generate useful metadata and give you information about the most important decisions you can make in your demographic to increase your well-being while conserving energy. Having one less child to fund all of this abundantly, to create both time and money. These are incredibly potent steps, learning the art of cultural design, to analyze the yields from a protocol of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and change the protocol to increase the yields. These are the most intelligent arenas that I can think of for an individual, for a group, for anyone today. And at Happiness Data, at the microculture of Medicina, that's exactly what we're exploring.